Hello and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for May 21st, 2024. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about, and we're going to have a lot to talk about with my guest today. She's a live wire I met up in Edmonton, Endor, the 3 hours east of the edge of the world over in Lloydminster. This is episode 175, so I get that number right, and we'll figure it out from there. I have with me Kris Sims, who is the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And, it's like, after I've done like a couple of Bitcoin podcasts where I piss off about libertarians, and I do a couple of geopolitics podcasts where I piss off about libertarians, it's always nice to just do an honest to God, you know what, taxes suck. And we're going to find out why taxes, this particular tax, which is the carbon tax in Canada, and then many other things, are where they're going today. So Kris, awesome. She was phenomenal, by the way, up at the Cornerstone thing that we did in Lloydminster. I can't wait for Sean Newman to actually get that out into the world. So Kris, thank you very much for coming on today and sitting and shooting shit with me.
It was really awesome to finally meet you up in Lloyd. I'd listened to your pieces there on Sean Newman's podcast, so it's super cool to be joining you and seeing you in your den environment. I know we're not on video, but I'm kind of gawking at the stuff behind you. Some of it looks like PC games, which look pretty awesome.
What Kris is referring to is for the last couple of months I've been having a private office finally built for myself and drum room, and which she can't see because I'm pointed the other way. But so this is actually the inaugural thing where this thing gets like thrown out to the world, and of course I'm going to like throw the video away. So that's fine because why? It's like not like I shaved for this thing or anything because it's an audio podcast. All right, so but yeah, like some of the board game collections, the weirdness that is my life is all behind me. And you guys can't see it, and tough. That's the way things are. And bite me, it's fun. All right, so. With that said, Kris, talk to me. I know that I've heard about the carbon tax, and I know that there's all sorts of versions of it going in around the world, and Canada is kind of a test bed for everything, if I understand correctly. So at least that's the way it looks to me down here. So talk to me. Floor's yours. Enjoy, and then we'll figure it out from there.
You bet. So our carbon tax up here is terrible, and you guys should never have a federal carbon tax imposed on you in the United States of America. For folks who don't know where I am, I'm in Lethbridge. I'm about 6.5 hours south of where you guys were, where we all were up in Lloydminster. I'm just north of the Montana border. It's super warm here. We've got cacti and roadrunners. We're often referred to as the Texas of Canada, and I say that lovingly. So here in Canada, back in 2008, we got our carbon tax first imposed upon us, but it was only in the province of British Columbia. It's Canada's most western province. And so British Columbia, politically speaking, is kind of like Washington State, kind of like Oregon. They've got, the big kind of resource industry up to the north and east. But on the coast, you've got that kind of left-wing, let's tax everything to death mentality. So back then, they brought in a carbon tax. And of course, typically of politicians, how can you tell if they're not telling the truth? Well, their lips are moving, right? And so what they did back in 2008 is they said, oh, this carbon tax is going to be revenue neutral. Keep that in mind. It's going to stop at $30 per ton, which equates to about, 5 cents per liter. And it's going to create a plethora of alternative, affordable energy options for people. And this is the kicker, Tom. It's going to reduce emissions. Fast forward to now, none of that is true. Like, none of it is true. Of course, suckers we are. So now federally, we have a mandatory minimum carbon tax of $80 per ton. I'll explain that in a second. It is nowhere near revenue neutral. It has not created a bunch of alternative energies that people can just flip a switch to, like a dilithium crystal. And this is the weird thing, is it hasn't reduced emissions. Like, it has not reduced emissions. So according to the government's own data, the provincial government's own flippin' data, outside of massive level lockdowns where people weren't allowed to leave their homes or go to their bubble or actually go to work or school in 2020, are the emissions in BC, which is again the test case here, go up steadily along with this big punishing carbon tax. Why? Well, because people need to eat and they need to heat their home and they need to drive to work. Duh. right? I know everybody's shocked. So the worst thing, though, is that we already knew that this was a failure, both, environmentally speaking, if reducing emissions is the big thing you care about, and economically speaking, because it's a huge punishment, especially on the working class. We knew that BC was a failure. But of course, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came to power in 2015, and he's like, wow, everything's unaffordable here on the West Coast in BC. Gas is $2 a liter. That's awesome. I'm going to make this happen across Canada. Hold my beer. And so this is what he's done. And so now we have a mandatory minimum federal carbon tax that every province has to pay outside of Quebec. That's a whole nother story. But generally speaking, $80 a ton. Nobody knows what that means. Like, nobody picks up a ton of carbon on the way home from the grocery store. What it means, though, monetary, right? So what it is it's 17 cents extra per liter for gasoline and 21 cents extra per liter for diesel. And I please forgive me speaking in liters. In each US gallon, there's 3.8 Canadian liters. Okay. So picture about a jug of milk. Okay.
Yeah.
So for, about a fourth of that jug of milk, we're paying 17 cents a liter. Yep. Now, the big one, though, is the diesel. Because, of course, everything, look around your room right now, including your listeners. Look around your car, look around your office where you're listening to this. Everything you eat and use has been brought to you on a truck. All of those trucks run on diesel. And so every time a trucker is filling up the big rigs, they're spending about $200 extra just in this one tax, Tom. So this is where we're at with the carbon tax. And the real kick in the pants is that we're up here in Canada, okay? Like, we will freeze to death if we do not heat our homes. It's on home heating, too. So we're paying right through the nose. There's a sign behind me. It's not on video, but the average Alberta family, okay? We've got a parliamentary budget watchdog who looks at this stuff. It's just numbers. They're not political. They did the math. The average Alberta family is out more than $900 per year net, with all the rebates and crap factored in. So, and this is just the beginning. They're going to crank it up to $170 per ton within the next few years.
No, well, it's clear that this entire agenda is nothing but an anti-human agenda, and we obviously understand that. So, and we're seeing the same thing similarly down here in the United States. It's not like the Biden administration isn't trying to pass similar things like getting rid of propane stoves and and all the rest of it, because it's like and it keeps getting back to this idea that, well, so what you're trying to tell me is that, well, we're carbon and we eat carbon and we use carbon, but somehow we shouldn't actually, but we have to pay for it all because somehow the planet is going to care.
Yeah,
like I'm still like the disconnect here. I mean, even for the people who believe in this stuff or believe in this religion, and I get that it's a religion. I always have, and I've understood this religion 20 years ago when I was arguing with people. I'm like, this is dumb. Like, plants, it's plant food, folks. It's like without plants, there is no humans. Oh, right. That's the point.
Bingo.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so not just is it $1,900 a year for your average Canadian family, which roughly translates to about $700 a year for an American family, which doesn't sound like a lot, but at the end of the day, divided by 12 months is it's about $50 a month. And they do the same thing here in where I am in Gainesville, for example, in what I would call shit lib central in Gainesville. It's a typical university town, and they and every day they go to the county commission and they say, hey, we just need another 25 mils on our property taxes for this dumb thing or for that dumb thing. And it's always sold to you that way. Well, it's only $28 a year. Like, yeah, okay, it's only $28 a year. And this one's only $28 a year. And that one's only $28 a year. And then it's $50 a year. And then it's $100 a year. And then by the time you're done, you're like, okay, and so when am I supposed to eat?
Yep.
And but it's very, very, very obvious. And we're doing this on the day that Klaus Schwab has finally stepped down from the head of the World Economic Forum. And I find that actually kind of hilarious and awesome at the same time. So, like, I don't know, this, it's like, but they're not going to stop until we make them stop, right?
Yes. I'm curious. I didn't realize he'd stepped down today. Do we know
what
happened,
other
Hydra head is taking his place? Like which one's snaking around of the 7 and which one is
going to
taking
be
over?
the rest of his minions. But there's, I mean, you never know. Like Schwab was always a figurehead anyway, right? But it doesn't really matter. Like it's the same thing with Soros. He's 97 years old. His son is even worse than he is, right? So, but then again, he's also a moron. So, and
hey,
that's a good thing.
Don't underestimate how much damage can happen in that situation. I'm just saying. So,
y'all are still crown subjects. You've been ruled by morons for centuries. So.
So for folks listening who don't understand, Canada is still a constitutional monarchy. So yes, our head of state is actually King Charles III. It is not Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. In fact, that's why it's the term Prime Minister. He's the king's first minister. So you're getting to what you're saying is like, where's the end of this, right? What is their game plan, right? So a few things. Number one, if emissions are what keep you up at night and get you out of bed in the morning, and that is your brand of environmentalism, okay? I'm a form of an environmentalist. I buy everything used, okay? I recycle everything. I hand-sewed my baby's cloth diapers. I've got a big hippie streak in me, okay? I get it. But if emissions are your thing, this is what boggles the mind. Okay, let's just take that premise, okay?
Right.
Canada is responsible for less than 1.5% of global emissions. If they're worried about global climate change and global emissions, Canada has a tiny little fraction. It's a rounding error, okay? Right. So even if, God forbid, Canada ceased to exist, okay? Poof, nothing here but bears and moose. It wouldn't make a dent in global emissions. So this is where things get interesting, Tom. Is because what I will often say, because I'm a tax fighter, right? I'm the Taxpayers Federation. I fight against carbon taxes. But quite often hosts will say, okay, smart gal, how do you stop global warming or whatever they're calling it? And I'll say, okay, here, if you're worried about global emissions, why don't we sell our natural gas, which we have in abundance, to India? India has around 300 million people that burn wood and animal dung every single day. I'm not even touching coal, okay? Leave that aside. People in their homes, about 300 million of them, burning this stuff every day. Guess what they're begging to purchase from us? Natural gas.
Yep.
That would tackle the big end of the arithmetic problem, my friend. That would employ people in Canada under the best labor and environmental regulations you have on the planet, extracting our natural gas, and it would, number one, increase the indoor air quality of everybody in India who can replace this fuel. Two, it would free up the women and children whose job it is to gather all of that source material every single bloody day. Okay. And three, it would reduce global emissions if that is your end game.
Right.
It's funny, though, they don't jump on that.
Yeah, no,
they don't.
It's amazing.
They never do.
It's amazing because it's not about that, right? And it's a brilliant point. Then because you can also then turn around and do the same thing in places like Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and Indonesia, and I don't mean to pick on Southeast Asia or anything, but like it's everywhere. Like, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It never has. It never will. I still don't even understand why again, you're making their point for them by saying, look, this is you. Don't even believe in your argument, but I'll take your argument as given and say, okay, let's work with that. How about we do this? No, because it's really about the fact that they just hate you.
Mm-hmm. This is it.
It has nothing to do with that. And that's the first part of it. That's why they sell it to people who really do hate other people, right? But what they're really doing, and I'm now talking about what I would call Davos, what they're really doing is they're trying to control the flow of energy around the world, and trying to control the flow of capital around the world so that it still continues to flow up towards them. They continue to arrogate for themselves more power, more wealth, more influence, and everything else. In effect, what they want to do is, of course, sell your life back to you at pennies on the dollar, or at dollars on the cents while they extract all the wealth. And that's really what they're doing. Because never, when they talk about it in terms of it being carbon neutral or carbon positive or whatever, that's what they're saying. They're saying you're a blight on the planet. You're not a part of the natural system. Like last I checked, I am. When I die, I'm going to get composted. I'm going to become, as Benjamin Franklin said, here I lie, food for worms. And someone, and I've already told my wife, I'm like, don't like cremate me or anything else. Just plant me in the backyard and grow tomatoes over me. I don't care. Like
talk about recycling
that,
your energy.
Yeah, talk about recycling energy, right? I mean, I wrote whole articles for Lou Rockwell 15 years ago about thinking about every erg of energy I bring onto my property and how I can recycle it through a chicken, right?
Nice.
Right.
Nice.
When you think about it in those terms, and like, wow, I've got little garbage disposals with legs that run around and eat all the ticks and everything else. The only thing they won't eat is celery.
That's kind of concerning. What should we know about celery?
The reason being is because even chickens, as dumb as they fucking are smart enough to realize that celery is energy negative. It costs more energy to chew it up and digest it than you get out of it. Which kind of is exactly the argument about, like, I don't know, fucking EVs.
Oh, we can do EVs in
which
a second.
all run on coal anyway, right? So
yeah, exactly. We can do EVs in a second. So, okay. Like I said, I grew up a bit on Vancouver Island. I've literally, swum with the salmon and walked barefoot next to the orcas. So I get it. And I'm also old enough, by the way. I don't know if this was in your curriculum there in the United States of America, but in my grade 7 class, I was in one of those nerdy classes, and our year-long project was this. Kid you not, I still have the diagrams somewhere. The Ice Age is coming, period. We are in the middle of a dip. The next ice age, we're basically in a pause, and it is coming back. This is 100% guaranteed. All the scientists agree we're in dire peril because, of course, if things get really, really, really cold, it's really, really hard to live because you can't grow food, especially if you're under a glacier. So the project was, you have 1 year, survive the coming ice age. What do you do? And so I had this whole T-shaped bunker that would be above the glacier level, and it was built with titanium screws, which are naturally melting. It was a big thing. My point is that back then, yes, scientists were concerned about this, but at the time, I don't recall politicians and bureaucrats and special interest group taking advantage of working people because of it. They weren't coming out and saying, like, you have to pay the Ice Age tax or something like that, even if they truly believed that this is what was coming. And if they really thought so, that's dire, right? We better do something about it, or at least think about it. What's happening now, though, is exactly your point, okay? Here in Canada, it is perfectly illustrated, okay? So back when I was talking to you about the 2008 carbon tax, when it started out as a little itty bitty carbon tax, and by the way, our version of what the UK would call Labour, okay, the NDP, it's kind of like the left wing. Imagine the more left wing part of the Democrats, okay? Back then, right, kind of the lunch bucket, those sort of unionized people, they were opposed to the carbon tax. Why? Because it affected working people. It was costing you too much to drive to work and to heat your home, and that's not fair, right? Now, all of a sudden, they're big cheerleaders for this thing. But anyway, back in 2008, when this all first started, some folks were accusing the government of putting through what they described as a thinly veiled wealth redistribution system. Okay. And they said, oh, no, no, no. They clutched their pearls and they said, this is all about the environment. This is all about emissions. No, 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 no. How could you possibly think such a thing? This has got nothing to do with wealth redistribution, meaning taking a ton of money from the higher income working people and putting it out dispersely through what in the States would often refer to as the welfare state or the super low income folks. So I'm talking about the folks who can barely afford a bus pass. They're living in an apartment. Life's kind of tough for them, right? So there's all sorts of systems here in Canada that help those folks, both provincial and federally, even municipally in some cases, city level. But if you tried saying that this is what this was back then, they would freak out, okay? They would call you, back then it would have been not quite fake news, but the same equivalent. Today, what's fascinating is this. Now the Trudeau government themselves are saying, oh, but the poorest people among us get more back in rebates than they ever pay in the carbon tax. And they're admitting this is a wealth redistribution tax.
Right.
Even when we show them, hey, buddy, here's your emissions chart. See this going up? It's not working. They just blink at you and they say, oh, well, most people are getting more back than they pay in. Number one, that's not true. It's not most people, but that bottom quintile of people are getting more back apparently in rebates. Again, I don't believe the government, but according to the government, they're getting more back than they pay in. So it is a wealth redistribution scheme. And this is where we are right now with the carbon tax, and it's feeding into this electric vehicle stuff. I don't know if you guys are getting pulled in as much as we are here in Canada, but the amount of corporate welfare being thrown at these mega international vehicle companies to make electric vehicles at big losses is crazy.
Well, what's happening in the United States is a mixture of that. It's like we have to do it in two different ways. We have to, because our corporate lobbies are strong enough, and the way we organize ourselves is strong enough that you have, on the one hand, you have CAFE, corporate average fleet efficiency. I don't know if you actually guys have that in Canada or not. I did a whole podcast with Eric Peters about this earlier, sometime last year. So CAFE and this is particularly egregious for the United States, where a car manufacturer has to meet a particular corporate average miles per gallon fuel efficiency rating.
Got it.
That means if you sell a whole bunch of V8 powered trucks that get 12 miles to the gallon, you need to sell a whole bunch of EVs that make 200 miles to the gallon, so that you can average them out, and you're only allowed to sell a certain number of one versus the other and that they do that. Well, at the same time, they then like backdoor some corporate welfare through research grants and NSF grants and all those other stuff. That's how they play the game, right? But CAFE is freaking evil as shit. Like, it's beyond evil. It's destroyed cars in the United States. Like listen to the Eric Peters podcast that he and I did, a year ago, and it's fascinating because we watched, and this is the most pernicious thing about it. I live in Florida. To say that the average person outside of a major city drives a pickup truck would not be a stretch, right? We all drive pickup trucks. Now, pickup trucks in the United States and in Canada, they've gotten enormous. Like, if you go back and look at an F-350 from 20 years ago, it's smaller than today's F-150. Okay, and the F-150 was a light duty pickup truck. Like, it was smaller. There's a reason for that. And I always knew that CAFE was evil until I realized that this is how the thing is designed. Okay. It's designed based on the footprint of the car, meaning the width of the car times the wheelbase. So the bigger the wheelbase, all up until very recently, and Trump suspended CAFE for the 4 years he was in office, so it actually smoothed the curve out, even because this was all supposed to hit, the worst part of this was to already have hit the United States, making effectively pickup trucks illegal to sell in the United States. Seriously.
Whoa.
Okay. If you never saw a regulation designed by Europeans to fuck Americans because they don't understand that we drive 3 hours just to go, I don't know, to Walmart, because we like the one in Jacksonville better than the one that's around the corner. For whatever reason, this is what we do, because this is America. It's big. You live in Canada. You know how big it is. Okay. You drive 6.5 hours. You haven't left Alberta yet. These in Europe, they've traveled across 6 countries. Right. So, famously, Americans think 100 years is a long time, and Europeans think 100 miles is a long way.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea that the footprint, the way that the car companies got around the fines, and these fines are enormous, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a vehicle. The way they got around the fines was by making the trucks bigger, because the footprint versus miles per gallon that they had to hit without getting fined was a decaying exponential curve. So the bigger the area of the car, the lower they could get down to, realistic numbers, 18, 19, 20 miles to the gallon without. So they had to go to 140-inch wheelbase, 160-inch wheelbase trucks, sell them, and then tell us all, hey, you can take the family in your truck. And then they became our first vehicles as opposed to our third vehicles. And 2-seater beaters gone. V8s being legislated out of existence. Now everything has to be dual twin turbo. Hey, this, have you noticed why the car companies all have twin turbo V6s in their trucks now? It's not because we all want 700 pound-feet of freaking torque. It's because it's the only way they can hit the CAFE standards. So they've made the cars more complicated, shorter lifespan. So they turned them all into fucking washing machines. Remember, 20 years ago, we could buy a washing machine that could last 20 years. You get one with a porcelain drum and a real freaking motor and blah, 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 blah. And now they're literally disposable. They last 5 years and you throw them away. And yet somehow this is environment. Somehow this is environmentalism.
This is it.
Like, fuck a whole lot of you people. It's just bullshit.
Just add government.
And I literally used to argue this crap 15, 18 years ago with my shit lib friends. You know, they're gunning with their Dunning-Kruger armor on, running around in their midwittery, going, no, we hate all these people running around these SUVs and these pickup trucks they don't need. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And then they're the first, and I found out that then the one who used to do this to me the most was the first one in line to buy a Ford Maverick. Right, which was perfect, right? Because, that's exactly the kind of truck I've been wanting them to build for years. I'm like, asshole. They designed the car market to make you think you're smart. And then they gave you a car with a bed on it, with a shitty hybrid system that they sold to the loss leader for literally 3 months. And then they doubled the price since then. The $20,000 Ford Maverick now you can't find one for their money for less than 35 grand on a Ford lot.
Wow.
American, 35 grand.
American. Wow, that's a heck of a lot of Canadian money. No, we're facing the same sort of stuff up here. We caught Trudeau, the Taxpayers Federation. So for folks who aren't familiar with it, the Taxpayers Federation is very similar, but not affiliated with Grover Norquist's outfit there in the United States. They're the ones that typically make politicians sign pledges, for example, of no new taxes, right? That sort of activism.
Yeah. Grover's awesome. So it's the National Taxpayers Union here in the United States.
Yeah.
Grover's organization.
I love his line. I want government to be small enough so I can drown it in the bathtub. Like, it's one of the best lines ever. Now, I try to be nicer about it and say in a teacup, but we'll see. Trying to keep with our British tradition here. So it's a pretty good line of thinking. And so here, the Taxpayers Federation, a few years ago, caught the Trudeau government. It was in one of their major reports. It was right in the back in the appendices, which is where you find all the good stuff, just like in a budget. Okay. They were going to impose a big tax on pickup trucks and SUVs. So it was going to be around $6,000 to $7,000, depending on the truck. Right. We caught them at it saying, look, what are you guys doing here? And they freaked out. Okay. They said, nothing to see here. This is from an unaffiliated report, blah, blah, blah. They called us misinformation, which I'll get to in a second. It was pretty crazy. Considering the Taxpayers Federation, I mean, we've been around since 1990. Like, we're pretty mainstream. And we caught them on it. This point is that it's happening everywhere. It feels like in the West, this war on the car, war on private vehicles, war on the mobility of being able to put stuff in your pickup truck and bring it to your own private castle and do stuff with said things. A lot of them don't like that. And I can't figure out why. Because I've never been able to understand, just personally speaking here, I've never been able to understand control freaks. Like, managing my own life and my own family, it could be a full-time job. I've never for the life of me been able to understand why other people need to be in other business all the time, up in their grill, figuring out what they can drive, how big their house can be, how hot the temperature, how cool the air conditioning can be, what they should be eating. How is this any of government's business? None of this is government's business.
Now we have them saying you don't need to bathe all that often.
Ew.
Like, literally, they're out there now. They're making arguments about water rationing and how it's okay. Like, we're getting back to the point where the French are going to start bathing once a week or once a month. Like, it'll be right. They'll be used to it. It's we Americans. No, we're not doing that. I mean, we may be a little bit a little clean freaky here or whatever. You can argue that maybe we bathe too much, but like come on.
No, I'm okay with.
We're like, it's like, seriously, like we're at the point now where it's like everything's failing and they want you to feel guilty for being alive. It's not about anything else. It's like the carbon tax is literally like, it's the original. I used to say property tax was the original sin of government, but they're trying to move it. It's the original sin doctrine. They're now trying to move it to, you are born into the world with a carbon debt you can never pay back. to King Charles or Klaus Schwab or Goldman Sachs or whomever. And I don't even think Goldman's in on this shit anymore. They were for a while, and I'm like watching the American banks at this point, going, "Yeah, we're not down with this. This is silly. You're destroying what's left of the private formation of capital, and you people really are just commies." Yeah, no, there's no money to be made in communism, so Goldman's definitely against that.
Your theological comparison is really apt here, because there's so many ways you can go with this, but I'll try to be brief. So I was in on a session, back on banning pickup trucks. A few years ago, I was in on a session. We were all in lockdown, so I had to do it remotely for Vancouver City Hall. So this is like Portland. Okay. Imagine Portland, but in Canada. Okay. We just beat Vancouver in the hockey game last night. So that was nice. So Vancouver was very close to, number one, charging people mega bucks just to park in front of their own house. Okay. Number two, they were actually going to arm these meter maids with iPads or whatever, tablets, with this software. I can only imagine how much this would have cost taxpayers, that would take a picture or scan the type of vehicle it was. And if they determined, this bureaucrat that rules from a desk, which is what that word means, if they determined that this was a pickup truck or an SUV that was worth too much, quote unquote, if it was too fancy or new, they would charge them extra, okay, as this crazy punishment. So all this said, I'm in line, I'm in the queue, I'm waiting as a taxpayer advocate to say, no, take this tax and shove it. We're not doing this. And I'm behind the queue, and this young lady comes on. I'm guessing she must have been around 20. And I mean this earnestly, okay? She was so frightened, Tom. She believed that her world, as she knew it, was going to burn up in 2 years. You could hear the fear in her voice. Mm-hmm. She was nearly weeping. And I couldn't believe it. I had to take my CTF hat off, my Taxpayers Federation hat off for a minute when I came on there to speak to her as a mother and say, the adults in your life should not have told you this.
Yes.
It was wrong. It was wrong for them to cause this level of anxiety in you. Yes. You are not responsible for global emissions, okay? Yep. The world is not going to burn up in the next 18 months, sweetheart. I promise you, okay? And the reason why I'm bringing this up...
At least not from carbon. It could be, the sun could fry us, but let's not have, that's a different catastrophe we should be preparing for. But sure,
and don't watch The Day After. Just don't do it. All those Gen X kids watched it too young. Yes. Don't watch that movie. Yeah. Or Threads in the UK. Don't watch it. So a reason why I'm bringing this up is because when you actually try to look at, seriously, pollution, environmentalism, human beings' impact on the world, especially what's outside our own front door, okay, the cleanliness and health of our environment.
Yep.
I gave her this example. I hope she was still listening. I have no idea. At the turn of the last century, okay, the late 1800s, okay, yep. Places like New York City, places like London, the jewels of human civilization, were drowning in horse manure.
Yep.
They had yards of it high, okay? There were horse corpses in the street. It was running down the middle of the street. It makes me gag thinking of the smell, okay? Yep. My point is we have had transportation pollution crises before, okay? And it was way worse then. Yep. The government, okay, did not manage to ban horse-drawn carriages. Can you imagine if they tried something like that back then? Forget about it. No way. What was wonderful is that human beings invented the internal combustion engine. And then Mr. Ford popularized it on the assembly line in the United States of America. And bingo, bango, the air got cleaner. The streets were suddenly swept. There was not excrement running down the street. We did not have bloated corpses piled up on what would be sidewalks. And abracadabra, your health and environment improved. Yep. Dramatically speaking. I challenge anyone, look up the pictures from the late 1800s, okay? And then look down your own street, apart from the litter, and yes, we know, but look at the air, okay? Look at what should be the cleanliness of the street. It's incomparable. My point here is we are able to improve things through human ingenuity without government taxing us to death just for existing.
Well, at that point in time, the government was on the side of the horseshoe union.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like that's the, and the horse and the buggy makers. Like that's where the government was, because that's where the money was.
Mhm.
It wasn't in the new technology. It was in the old technology, because that's how government makes their money.
Sure.
So, your point is absolutely taken, because it's the same thing with people used to heat all their houses. We used to all heat all of our houses with wood and
Yeah.
coal. We used to cook all of our food with wood. And, London was literally one big smog. I guess as bad as Beijing is today, or even Mumbai is today, it's nothing like it was 150, even 200 years ago. We have to attenuate some of these things because it's not the 2020s. But
I know.
I've been making these arguments
still in
since
the
the
80s.
90s, right? So I have that's 150, not 100 years ago. Because of course, some jackass on Reddit be going, well, it was 100.
No, my
years
clock
ago.
stopped in 2020.
Fuck
It
yourself,
doesn't go past
asshole.
there.
Go fuck yourself, Google boy. You don't know something because you Googled it. You're not smart because you Googled something. That doesn't make you. That's the fatal conceit of millennials, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm at that point where I am too old to be arsed to give a fuck about any of this, because they're literally trying to destroy the future of my daughter, your kids, and everybody else's. And the time for us to work everybody through it and try and no. That girl that you were trying to help through this, you were right to open with, your parents were wrong to do this to you. In the same way where I will say in one breath that they're trying to make fetal alcohol syndrome, i.e. Greta Thunberg, sexy, I also understand that Greta is absolutely a victim.
She's
in
a
the
child.
same exact
She said all
way.
that. I know.
She's exactly the same problem. And it bothers me to watch them do this. And I'm at the point now where I've literally said I'm as much of a hardcore anarcho-libertarian, blah, 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 that I am. I'm like, you know what? I think if we're going to be sitting here watching these people argue for carbon taxes to destroy our lives and World War III to cover up their failing financial systems, could we just stop spending 25% of the money we spend on defense and spend it on national therapy?
Right.
Everybody just needs a little bit. They just need a therapist. I literally said this to my therapist 2 weeks ago, or the last time I was in there. I'm like, dude, I don't. It's if there's some way that I could sell stock in psychotherapy or stock recommendations in psychotherapy, I would, because that's what everybody needs.
Yeah.
Because it's really we're just dealing with people now who are caught up so much in the model of the world that they have in their head, as opposed to the reality of the world that they live in, because they spend all of their time on Twitter or in what I like to call flatland, as opposed to meat space. And one of the things about my office is I put a big freaking window right there to stare at the jungle that is my yard, and the lack of, and the field now that there's no goats on it, going, oh my God, there's so much life out there.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't miss it. I don't forget about it every day. It's really important that we do this, because, just stuck in your home every day, trying to figure out the world from what's happening on the internet. It's not real. That's not reality, folks. That is the simulation. You have to get out of it.
Yeah, you do. And look at what's happened in the last 4 years, right? Since 2020. Look at how, lockdowns, according to very smart people and good studies, although it shouldn't take a rocket scientist to understand that if you lock kids, especially and young people, away, and you just feed them full of fear and anxiety for years on end, that it's going to affect their mental health. And so again, getting back to the taxes and elements here is where I'm trying to give people a little bit of hope. Okay. And telling them, it is not all going to come to a screeching halt, next year, everything's fine. People are working hard to make sure everything is as clean and new as possible. But I wanted to give them a little bit of a break and say, you know what? It's not up to you. This is not all on your shoulders, young person. You do not, as part of whatever group you're part of, need to, throw yourself in front of traffic in order to get people to clean up their habits. People already naturally clean up their habits, okay?
Yes.
As their wealth increases, okay? And we can see this on the macro level at countries, macro level of countries and the micro level of individuals. As the wealth increases, All of a sudden, if you have more affluence and you have more disposable income and you can breathe and you're looking around and you're not scared about the next rent payment, you go, oh, wait, my street's a little dirty. I'm going to start a door knocking committee with a whole bunch of litter bags and we're going to have fun and wear funny hats and we're going to clean up. Or,
Yep.
hey, look, that river is looking mighty untidy. Let's start a group that helps clean up the shores. Let's make sure that the fish are revitalized. It's because of affluence and the ability for people to get ahead in life that lets them look around and say, hey, look, maybe we should start working together to clean up the environment or working individually to clean up the environment. Same sort of thing can be said about developing nations. That is why. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you're absolutely right. It's a natural thing that with affluence, birth rates drop, which is why we're not going to have a Malthusian population cliff where it's going to be 30 billion people on the planet in 50 years, because it doesn't work like that, because, it's not a single variable problem. As Dexter White and I talk about this all the time. Yes. This is not a, create a model and then then move the thing all the way to the right in your Excel model. And then go, oh my God, it's going to end. Like, it doesn't work that way. There's this thing called the diminishing law of diminishing marginal utility, where ultimately human beings, they acquire up to what they need. And then as they acquire the next unit of that thing that they need that unit of thing less. And then eventually they stop demanding any more of that, and they start demanding something else. So whereas when you're starving to death, you don't give a shit about where the food came from or how. All you care about is that it's there.
Yep.
And then once you have enough food, now you can start thinking about how, the quality of the food, everything changes because your perception of reality and your needs relative to your next meal and your next day change. It's a process. And the problem, and Kris, this is the really interesting part about this, is that when you stop to think about what I said earlier about flatland versus meat space, we locked all our kids in schools, in their homes, doing school on Zoom. 1, 2, these kids were already addicted to screens in the first place. We're already seeing the higher and higher incidences of Asperger's, autism, this, that, and everything else, which even if you lay aside all the arguments about, vaccines, complications, and all the rest of it, just the society itself is it's the nature part of the nature versus nurture argument that you have them predisposed towards that as opposed to going out in the world and cutting trees down and trying to light the woods on fire and all the shit that we did when we were kids, like, and riding our bikes and all the rest of it. We're not doing that stuff anymore, right? And because of that, they're primed for this kind of overdeveloped linear thinking. Okay, because that's what autism is, and it's extreme left brain possession in a lot in a killer sense. That's one aspect of it, and that's not the only aspect of it. There's one aspect of it, and I'm going to get over my skis, and people will scream at me. But this is we're exacerbated the tendencies that already existed within society, so that now you have kids who are rightfully scared about what's going on, watching their parents like lose their freaking minds. I give the millennials shit all the time, but they're the ones that watch their parents go broke 3 times, certainly here in the United States, 2000, 2008, and then 2020. They get it that the world is that there's nothing for them, right? And and it's all going to fall apart. And then you got the kids behind them, my daughter and younger, who just looking at it going, okay, all of this is fucked. They're all full of shit. And just get out of our way.
Yeah.
Like, I can tell you right now that even the autistic kids within that segment, they're all come to the same conclusion. They're all like, yeah, they're all full of shit. Yeah. And they don't believe any of it. And because they're naturally skeptics of all the stuff that they see online, because they've already been programmed to be able, they already have the right heuristics for trying to figure out what is and isn't bullshit. They're actually quite good at it. It's the problem is that my generation, the Gen X and the millennials, still existed in this netherworld between the two, where some of us did and some of us didn't. And it's a mess. And we're the ones fighting amongst ourselves, because we're the ones who are going to effectively take power soon, eventually, if they let us, if the the olds actually let us take power. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting
Yeah,
process.
I think our daughters are around the same age. Mine's 16.
Mine's 18.
And okay, yeah, same generation then. And my son is 11. And my husband and I talk about this quite often. It's more, you know, in a nicer tone of how is it that Gen Xers have managed to adapt to the internet, and have we really? Because we were raised without it. We came to adulthood without it, largely speaking. And then
Right.
now it's still kind of overwhelming to have, you know, everything at my thumb tip that I want to watch on YouTube. But I also know how to do a card catalog. I also know how to drive stick. I can use a rotary phone. I can do actual paper research. I'm used to going out in the world, in meat space, as you say, talking to other humans. For most of my life, I was a journalist. And most of the time, I was in places like City Hall or in murder trials or pretty intense stuff where you have to pay close attention to what the other human beings are saying, right? It's not about what's being said on Twitter or X, or, you know, how many thumbs up something gets or not. That was completely not the point back then. And so what I find interesting is now we've come to this point where my daughter is the same way as yours, saying, you know what, I don't believe any of it anymore, and I don't care. And it doesn't seem to phase her. She just marches on her merry way, gets good A's at school, does her thing, and she's planning her life. And I think that's ultimately where we want to get our kids, regardless of where you land on the political spectrum. If, you know, you want to save the spotted owl in the rainforest, that's awesome. If you want to make sure that we have as low taxes as possible, hello, that's great too. But what I find interesting is where you would just come down to the point of not believing anything. And I think this dovetails nicely, if you have time, where we can talk about the other major thing that's affecting Canada here, and that is what is real. What is real news? What is fake news? How the government is affecting that sort of thing, our censorship industrial complex, as it's often been referred to. Did you want to go there, or do you want to
Oh,
keep
yeah,
on our
absolutely.
hydrocarbon
This
discussion?
is no, no, this is a free flowing conversation.
Awesome.
As I said to you the other day when we were plotting this out, I'm like, the last conversation you and I had before we left the casino in Lloydminster was we were talking about Zack Snyder. I'm like, if we don't wind up having a geek out over Justice League, then we're doing it wrong. But I know.
It was so good.
But that being said, like, you know, faith, Alfred, faith. It's all about that. But before we got started today, you know, you laid out three things you wanted to talk about. We've kind of beaten the carbon tax and all of the attendant psychological damage that it's done, you know, around it. And these are ideas and concepts that are very, very well understood within my audience. But it's, you know, it is gold, goats, and guns, and
Mhm.
you know, we're watching the Biden administration try desperately again to go for another, you know, hey, can we redefine bullets or this or that or anything else? This is all this typical fucking Obama shit that we're just like looking at them going, yeah, 800 million guns, more on Labe. Like, fuck off. You're not taking our guns. But in Canada, they already got your handguns. And what?
Mhm.
The Trudeau's trying to go after the long guns? Is
Yeah.
that, am I hearing this right?
You are. So our situation is kind of interesting. So we don't have the Second Amendment, but we do have, I would
More's the pity.
argue, yeah, I'd say a relatively heavily big gun ownership. And I mean legal law-abiding gun owners. I'm not talking about gangbangers here. And so if you compare us to other countries in the world, I think we're close to like fifth. Like we're up there. I think we're above even Northern Ireland sort of thing. So we're quite up there when it comes to owning firearms. I'm a firearms owner myself. Generally speaking, if you grew up rural, so on farm or in the woods or whatever, Western, hello, me too. So a place like, for example, north of North Dakota, north of Montana, north of Washington State, okay? If you grew up in that region of Canada, most of the time, especially if you're Gen X or older, your family had firearms. It was a tool just like a pickup truck or a chainsaw or a snowmobile if you lived up north, okay? This was an essential element of running your ranch. So if you've got coyotes that are coming after your cattle, you shoot them with your long gun. If you're raised in the woods of British Columbia like me, your family hunted for deer or a moose every year. So our freezer one year was full of moose meat. It was the best ever. They cooked them with green pepper. It was awesome. And other than that, it was venison. That was a good way to get a bunch of healthy red meat for your family. This was standard, okay? Like in our family, we had a fancy gun rack. I think there were about 8 of them there, all there, legal. It was not a big deal. My point is, owning a firearm in Canada was not a big deal. Handguns was always a little bit different, and that was what was called a restricted license. So you would go through a big rigmarole of, proper background checks, and usually it was a former cop that taught you a 2-day course, and you aced it and all that stuff. And then there's rules around it, like you can't leave it loaded. It has to be in a lockbox, those sort of things. But you can have a restricted license. I have lots of family members that own handguns. What has happened now, number one, the Liberal Party back under the previous leader of Jean Chrétien, folks might remember him from the early 90s, okay? They tried doing what was called a long gun registry. And that is where these bureaucrats tried building a list of every rifle and shotgun. So forget handguns, just long guns. All the rifles and shotguns in Canada, they tried making a list, an actual physical list of these things. As you can imagine, it blew up into this boondoggle. It cost taxpayers around $2 billion with a B. This is in the early 90s. And it didn't make anyone safer because these were like ranchers and duck hunters. Nobody cared. All that happened is it wasted a whole bunch of police resources and a bunch of taxpayers' money. Fast forward to now. We have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, I would describe his politics as being pretty hard urban left, generally speaking. And he has now banned handguns. So the folks who already have them in their possession, I think right now the current state is they have them in their possession. They have not surrendered them physically to the state yet. But if I, for example, wanted to go through the process of getting my restricted license and buy a handgun, I could not do so anymore. So that is cut off. So no new people can get a new restricted license. What they're going for now, though, Tom, is that now they're saying, okay, here's this magical list of things of long guns that we don't like anymore, usually based on their looks. I'm not kidding. Like if they've got an extra stock grip or if they're painted black.
We have the same thing here in the United States. It's
okay.
If it's that's only a gun used to kill people. Like all guns are used to kill things. Like that's what they're for.
Yeah.
Just because it used to be a military rifle doesn't mean you can't take Bambi down with it. Doesn't mean you can't kill coons that are going through your garbage, and it doesn't mean that you can't threaten some black bloc wearing Antifa motherfucker who decides he's going to come and protest outside your house because he doesn't like what you wrote on Twitter last week. Oh, by the way, that's a valid use of a firearm, especially here in
the
Florida.
United States. You guys have the Second Amendment,
especially here in Florida where we have castle doctrine. We don't just have no duty to retreat. We have the ability to know it's our land, and just don't. You have to have a good reason to shoot somebody.
I thought you guys were legally required to own a gun at the age 14 or something. No, once you graduate junior high,
the law's a little
You must own a tank.
There, it's a little unclear as to whether or not we're supposed to start.
Minimum 1 dozen rounds per tank.
But I love what you described in Canada was the way I grew up in New York. By the way, New York was already like this. In New York, my dad when he retired from the police department, and I remember sitting in the car with him when he was going through during the year that he was like burning off of all of his vacation time as he was retiring, because it took him over a year to actually retire.
It was a parade. It was a retirement parade for a year.
Well, no, it's just that he had over a year's worth of friggin' time. Yeah. So he his last day, he didn't go into the office for a year. Then he had to drive back to the Bronx and then finally put his paperwork in a year later. But when he did, he also had surrendered his, he angsted about it and surrendered his pistol license, his pistol permit, because he's like, I don't really need this anymore. And he's like, I don't shoot, and I was never a very good shot with the damn thing in the first place, and that's that. So he voluntarily gave it up simply because now he was in his 50s, and he's like, that was never really a big deal for him. But I remember him going through the process and like, do I really want to deal with this crap? And not really. So he gave up his handguns, but he only had a service revolver basically.
Sure. And even for a service revolver of what would have been standard issue back then for, I think it was NYPD. Was it NYPD?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, he was NYPD.
Even here, even if it's just a 6-shooter or whatever service revolver, you would be majorly restricted. But now they're going an extra step forward, Tom, in that they've got this list of, like you just said, like ones that look scary. And we're not even like, okay, like The capacity on the number of rounds in your
Yes.
magazine is standard across Canada. It doesn't matter if it looks like a wood grain 1970s station wagon or if
Right.
it looks like something that Rambo borrowed. Okay.
Right.
It's the same. And so
Right.
this is where it's super weird is that they were going after these things that had cosmetic differences. And what's interesting here is I think, like, as a woman, I think they bit off a little bit more than they can chew because some of these firearms had things like removable stocks or where you can adjust it because you got short little girl arms, right?
Yep.
Speaking personally. Or it was lighter, right? And they're
Mhm.
typically ones that would have been used to, like I said, take out a coyote. Like the round is super small. It's a
Yeah,
bit bigger
no,
than
I
a
mean,
22
like women really like AR-15s, by the way, and it has
because they're
nothing to.
light.
It's
Yeah.
light. There's no recoil. It shoots 223. It's got a big friggin' spring in the stock in order to deal with the recoil. They don't really like, shooting 30-30. My wife doesn't like my wife is a dead shot with an M1 Garand, but she's like, yeah, I don't want to shoot it on a regular basis. But like the only gun I ever actually bought her was, a match grade AR-15. Like, why? Because she really liked it because it was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't shoot. So I've got a beautiful 12 gauge. It's stainless steel. It looks a lot like the one that Vin Diesel has in Fast and Furious. I quite love it. It's pump action, but it's
Right.
got pretty decent kick on it. Like it hurts. Like
Yeah.
I almost,
12
like
gauge is
crap,
serious
comical.
business.
Yeah, it seriously is. And so I don't get out much, right, to do target practice, but it's still legally my own thing. And so this is where they kind of stepped in it ignorantly again. What
Yes.
Reagan said, I'm from the government and here to help. Oh my goodness, you are so not helping right now. And so that's where they're at right now, where they're going to do what they're calling, and I don't know why it became called this, but it's common parlance. It's called the gun buyback program. So we never purchased it from the state anyway, so they shouldn't call it a buyback program, but I'm just using it because that's what everybody calls it. It's a seizure. But this is what's interesting is now they run into the problem of, okay, how do we figure out how much every single individual's firearm on this list that we just made up is worth? And then how do we transfer them this money? And then how do we go collect this firearm? And so what was pretty funny is that a few weeks ago, the scuttlebutt here is that they wanted Canada Post, okay, which is similar to you guys with your Pony Express, United States Postal Service, to go collect these firearms from people. Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here for your gun.
Yeah, and we're gonna get postal workers to do this. Aside from the fact that, yeah, no, that's not, yeah, like I'm not paying these people enough money for that. No, now they want, well, here in the United States, they just want to arm IRS agents, and I looked at the people that they were like hiring. I'm like, yeah, okay, it's fine. Like,
Yeah, this
like,
is fine.
okay, like, they're okay. There's that moment in the end of True Romance with Kristen Slater and Patricia Arquette where Chris Penn gets shot in the side while he's wearing a vest because
Oh
he's so
yeah, I
fat
haven't
that
watched
he
that in
made
ages.
that he
Yeah,
made a huge target. Well, guess what? Half of these IRS agents were fatter than Chris Penn was while he made that movie.
it's one of those things, right? You're listening, it's like, and the posties, good for them, told the Trudeau government, like, get bent. No, we are not going to be
Yeah.
wandering into someone's rural Saskatchewan or Alberta, back 40 and saying, hi, I'm here for your firearms. That is
Yeah.
not happening. What's really interesting, though, and this is where things get fun, is that provincially speaking, so our premier, her name is Danielle Smith,
Mhm.
she has instructed our police within our province, so that would be Edmonton City Police, Calgary City Police, a few other metropolitan police forces, and we don't have a provincial police force yet. So they're working on that. Some people really want one, whatever. I don't know if it would actually save taxpayers money. But we have what's called the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It's the federal police force here in Alberta. The premier has said, through the justice minister, we are not going to be putting money into gun collection. We're not doing this.
Right.
So yes, we're going to keep on fighting gangbangers and making sure we stop illegal border trade of guns, anything like that, where they're smuggling, and there are usually a lot of baddies involved with that stuff. They're putting money into that, but they are not putting any money into Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's gun collection from law-abiding firearms owners. And so it's really interesting. Quite often, provincial premiers, and I would say the same thing if she happened to be left-wing and we're standing up to Ottawa too, but quite often we don't see provincial premiers stand up to the federal government in Ottawa the same way you guys see state governors in many
Yep.
cases saying, you know what? No, we're not doing that. So this is something pretty new for us up here in
Yeah,
Canada to have.
it's really cool. I mean, how I've intersected with Danielle Smith, or every time I've intersected with her, I've been very impressed with what I've seen. Our governors here, you have to remember that the United States really isn't one country. It's 50 little countries. Remember, the federal government doesn't have plenary policing power. It doesn't. It has the ability to enforce federal regulations, federal laws. That's it. It does not have that plenary policing power is purview of the state. If for example, capital crimes are not federal, they're not federal crimes. They're tried in the state in which they were committed. They're a state crime because the state has the ability, it's the state of Florida, the state of Texas, or whatever. So individual state governors are really heads of state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's only in the last 80 years, or now almost 100 years since FDR, where we've seen the use of federal money being used as a means by which to bind down the states into doing the federal government's bidding through first extract the money through taxes, again, going right back to what we talked about originally, and then selling that money back to you with strings in order to get the money back that they stole from you in the first place. That's the way the system works. Okay. And it's no different than what they do, and you guys have the same kind of situation that we do. And, the most famous of this in my lifetime was the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit that Richard Nixon put into place in the 70s. In order for the states to get their federal highway money back from the government that they stole through collecting gas taxes and all the excise taxes and everything else, you had to implement a national 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. If you didn't, then you couldn't get any of your money back. No different than what they've done to Viktor Orban, what the EU's done to Viktor Orban in Hungary, freezing his money because he doesn't virtue signal enough for them. It's the same process. And understand that once you see it in one idiom, you see it everywhere. And it is that, retributive, retributive, not just redistributive, but retributive. It's a punishment model and how taxes are used as a means by which regulatorily to punish individual members of the quote unquote collective against, by the collective against the individual. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about at the county level, the city level, the HOA level, the state level, the federal level, or the transnational level. It's all the same. All of these governments are built on the same fucking ridiculous goddamn model. We point guns at you, steal your money, and then you have to beg us to give it back to you with strings. How about you go fuck yourself and we call it even?
Yeah.
That's the mindset we all have to have. And what I've seen from Danielle Smith so far in Alberta is exactly that. And I think I think it's not just that. Alberta, from my perspective, is an interesting case study in how that is going to spread, because I've heard from people in Saskatchewan, I've heard from people in Ontario, in British Columbia. I've heard this from all of them. Manitoba, they're all saying the same thing. Yeah, that's enough.
Yep.
And so, it's a good thing. And what we have in the United States, well, we have, California, New York, up until recently, they had enough political power that they enforced those ideas through Washington, D.C. Well, it's not working like that anymore. We're getting closer and closer and closer to that moment where everybody just, flips the script and says that's enough. At the beginning of the year, I said that one of the major themes for 2024 would be soft secession.
That's a great term.
Effectively at the state and at the state level and the county level. We have home rule here in Florida. Like each individual county has the limited ability to supersede, state law, and nullify state law. We have some of that, and it's why our county sheriffs, especially in the United States, are some of the most important offices in the country.
Yeah,
like the guy who is your best friend from a tyranny perspective, interestingly enough, is actually the sheriff. because the
That's so
sheriff
interesting.
is a constitutional office.
Right?
So I got news for you. Yeah, the sheriff can basically tell everybody to go, no, we're not doing it. I've said
Right.
this many, many times, and it doesn't matter what we're talking about, be it like the great taking and trying to take people's homes and everything else. So the bank has to go through the sheriff, and the sheriff goes, no, you ain't taking Jim's house. Jim's house ain't getting taken. You need to work that shit out between the two of you. That's
Wow.
between you and Jim. That ain't. I'm not getting in the middle of this.
That
And
kind of small local government autonomy is just that'd be pretty fascinating up here. I mean, we're doing pretty well when it comes to smaller, more local government because we advocate for that because frankly, it's easier to hold politicians to account if they're your neighbor and
yeah,
they're local and close and you're not having your life run from Edmonton or Ottawa. And so
mm-hmm.
that is why fundamentally we want smaller local government because it saves you money and it makes people much more accountable and it's better for everyone. What's interesting here is Alberta is the only province in Canada that has a recall legislation, both at the provincial and municipal, so city hall and school board level. So in the
Nice.
United States, of course, this is pretty standard. I mean, you guys, I think, elect everybody, right?
Well,
Here,
yeah, yeah. There are certain things. Certain things cannot be. Certain offices, federal offices, cannot be recalled. But yes, but
okay,
yes.
and it's pretty fascinating. And so here we don't do federal yet. We would like to. We want to see this at the federal level. But what's interesting here in Alberta is that, yeah, we have recall legislation. So if you're a member of the Legislative Assembly, okay, so a governor or, a congressperson at the state level, you can fire them between elections. And what's really cool, as we've seen in the States, is it can go both ways. That
Mm-hmm.
person can win that by-election and win their job back, so to speak.
Yep.
And so it's kind of a validation. So it does cut both ways.
Mm-hmm.
We also have it at the local city hall level. We just had a failed attempt on the Calgary mayor here in Alberta. And there's also one at the school board level, which I don't think has been used yet. And I don't think a lot of parents know it exists. But if
Mm-hmm.
we have that kind of direct democracy and those tools in the toolbox, we think that people are going to be better off. So
Oh,
all this
absolutely.
is said is less power in Ottawa, more power here and smaller localized government because it makes them more accountable and it saves them a ton of money.
Well, ultimately, systems as big as Washington D.C. or Ottawa or
Mhm.
London or God forbid Brussels or dude, the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they are unsustainable
Yeah.
as systems. They're human organizations that are too big to sustain themselves for any length of time because it's just the fundamental inability for them to regulate and not create chaos. And eventually, people just stand up and go, you know what? No. And
Yeah.
and even if all they do is they sit back and they go, you know what? Yeah, I'll turn that paperwork in 6 months from now, or yeah, I'll get to it next week, and then they never do, and then they eventually the cost of administering these
Yes.
systems is so high that eventually they just collapse. The Lake Gary North used to say all the time that the best way to beat the government bureaucrat is to give them every piece of paperwork that they actually ask for,
Yeah. Yeah.
drown them in the paperwork, and then they're like, oh shit,
I
and
keep,
then they don't know what to do because then they can't possibly process it all.
yeah.
And
We're in
all
that.
that's yeah.
We're in that situation up here. Trudeau has added around 100,000 people to the federal bureaucracy. That doesn't sound like much on an American scale, but I think it's around a 40% increase.
Yep.
That is in human beings working for the government. And we're not talking frontline workers, not talking about some Coast Guard person who's going to save you from a shark off the
Right.
coast. I'm talking about
Talk
a
about
paper
bureaucrats.
pusher. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. What's interesting here is that they are fighting tooth and nail because the federal government wants them to go into the office 3 days a week, after the lockdowns and stuff. This is today. Like they're
Mhm.
fighting this today. So
Right.
that's a huge problem. Second, they always give out bonuses. So they will give bureaucrats, big mega bonuses, tens of thousands of dollars, even though they're failing. So we'll have a crown corporation up here, for example, which is like I guess, a state company or a federal
Right.
government organization there, whose only job your one job is to keep housing affordable. Fail. Fail. They totally fail, but they still hand out mega bonuses.
Yep.
Same sort of thing at our central bank, the Bank of Canada. Their one job is to keep the interest rate low. Fail. They still hand out these bonuses. The point is it's all this taxpayers' money being handed to them hand over fist, even though they're not even performing well. I forget the gentleman's name. I wish that I remembered it. It was about a year ago. He said, you know what? Do this thought process. If you really think that things are fine and that you think taxation is boring and you don't want to think about it, if it's safe to, close your eyes and picture this. Picture your salary nearly doubling. Bang. Every month, you have double the amount of salary that you do right now. What could you do with that money? Could you eventually afford a house? Could you help pay off the house you already own? Could you put your kid in a private or charter school and give them a better shot? Could you pay for their trade school? Could you get your mother that extra medical help that she needs that the state is not providing? Double your salary. What could you do with it? That's how much taxes take from you.
Yep. Minimum.
That's it.
Minimum.
Yeah. So it's shocking when you think of it that way. And then if you've got your sister-in-law who's beaking off during Thanksgiving dinner, saying something like, oh, well, think of all the services that this pays for.
Yep.
Think about the services. Let's do that. Think about the services that the federal government, in this case in Canada, pays for. So they can't run the passport office. Our healthcare system is a complete mess in many cases. Our education system quite often leaves a lot to be desired. There are very few people I know who don't work for the government who will say, you know what, we get A+ service in institutions. I'm super happy with how they're being run. The point is they're not being well run. They don't even have good performance metrics. They're not even meeting them themselves. They're still getting bonuses. There's way too many of them, and they take half of our money.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. And one of the funny parts about this is that when I used to do practical libertarian politics 20 years ago, and I go to the conventions and the meetings and whatnot, and everybody and all the private industry guy, all the people and the small entrepreneurs and everything else I was like pissing and moaning about government employees. I'm like, oh, by the way, at this point in my life, I was a government employee. I'm like, oh, by the way, no one sees waste like a government employee.
That's right.
Nobody sees it better. And so you talk to a real government employee and you don't talk down to them and you don't try and alienate them. And you just sit there and like, tell me more. And they'll tell you all about that. And this is good use of our tax money. And I'm like, of course, it's terrible. And they hate it and they hate being that, in effect, worthless because they're not doing productive work. So they have no purpose. So they're trapped by whatever their circumstances. A lot of them are just trapped by the circumstances. They got mortgages. They've got kids in school.
Like the rest of us.
All the rest of it. And they're living the same life that everybody else is, trying to figure out how to make ends meet on a government salary. It's sometimes not a particularly good one. And so it's a matter of everybody sitting back and having to like really just dig in and go, look, we're not going to vote our way out of this. We're not going to get out of any of this stuff until we get to the point where we all look at each other and go, the system is fucked. It's not working for anyone other than the people who are making the edicts. And then you have to ask yourselves, who put the system in place? Maybe we should be looking at them, because all the stuff that we've talked about so far when it comes to American federalism is better than Canadian quasi-federalism and all the rest of it. This is why I keep putting it out there in the zeitgeist. And I refuse to compromise on this point, even though I know that the United States has turned into an aggressive, obnoxious fucking empire. Yet they are still trying to destroy it from the inside out because of all of these things I just laid out in this podcast and all the things I've talked about, because those things are strong enough to resist, to be rebuilt into a system that we all would prefer to live under. And they need that to fail. They need the American experiment to fail and to prove to all of humanity that's not the way. This isn't the way it's supposed to work. It's got to work with Germans and British with bad teeth running the fucking world. That's what we need. We need more Ursula von der Leyen's. It's the only version of reality that works. We need more Barack Obama's telling us, and AI is telling us that you didn't build that. Like that's what they're arguing. And we all know that system is fucking horseshit. We know that it doesn't work. So why are we even listening to them anymore. Justin Trudeau, why does anybody listen to it? At the end of the day, who cares? Don't pay as little as you have to. Not advocating anybody doing anything illegal, but there's plenty of ways to ensure that they get as little as possible for as long as possible until the whole thing finally just stops. And it's, and we just, move on with our lives. And that's, ultimately, if we don't let them get us involved in a war we can't win with policies we can't sustain and money we can't afford to literally buy for our labor, eventually, eventually the whole thing will just stop and we'll just replace it with something better. That's the best we can hope for at this point. But we need to understand what the arguments are and what we're all suffering under. And if we can do that, then we can cross the political divide and go, look, it's not about carbon. It's about pollution.
Yes.
It's not about education. It's about indoctrination.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. That as well.
For sure.
The metaphor, metaphor, and this as well as I do. Mr. Dunning-Kruger, this. So shut the fuck up and let's go fix the world.
I think quite often people can get, number one, distracted by all of the noise that's out there. And two, they can get down and depressed and think that they can't fix it. And I think that makes people disengage. But if they're completely disengaged and not paying attention at all, they're still getting fleeced. And this is the point. The government is still taking half their money. And so this is where I don't know if I'm being naive in thinking that Canada structurally isn't quite as far gone as it looks like some of the United States is. Governmentally structured speaking, if I'm saying that right. So like I said, here in Alberta, we have mechanisms like we have referendums, we have recall legislation, we have at all levels of government. We're getting smaller and more accountable. It's not going the other direction. It's going the better direction. It's not perfect, but it's going the better direction. And so we would argue that if you get off the bench and you get involved, like for example, I'll give you a good example. So a couple of years ago, we had a previous leader of the opposition, the Conservative Party of Canada, who had signed one of our famous pledges of I will scrap the carbon tax. I'm opposed to the carbon tax. If I ever become prime minister, I will not have a carbon tax. Well, he did an about face after he became party leader, and he said all of a sudden, hey, I'm in favor of a carbon tax. Well, he didn't last that long as leader of that party. And it was groups like the Taxpayers Federation and frankly, everyday tax-paying Canadians who were part of that group who kicked him out. And so we were sending letters, huge petitions. It was a massive push because we know I've worked in government. Other members of my crew have worked in government. We know what that other side of the wall functions like. And so we were targeting emails directly to members of parliament, right? Because we knew when they were having their caucus meetings and their huddles, and we had their constituents from their ridings, meaning their voters, okay, getting right up their nose about this, saying, if you don't put a stop to this, I'm going to door knock against you. And I think that's really important. So now he's gone. And now the current leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, is promising to get rid of the carbon tax altogether, hopefully before lunch on his first day, if he has ever elected prime minister. What I'm saying is that I still think that empowering the people to get off the bench and that level of direct democracy is really, really powerful because on average, I think the amount is shockingly low. I think 2% of Canadians have ever been a member of a political party. This is different from the States. It is super small. But if you activate even a chunk of that 98% of people who are sick and tired and not going to take it anymore, you can really push the needle within these political parties and make them change their votes. And so that way, that's an example I would say of a win. Now, depends on what happens after the next election, but we have them on record out loud with their face on camera, etc., saying they're going to get rid of this thing. And so we think that that is the best way to push people, is to give them that little bit of hope, get over that apathy a little bit and make them take agency and say, you know what, not on my watch, bro. You are not going to spend my kid's future. Not today.
Yeah, well, the only I'm not just not discouraging any of that.
That's okay.
What I'm about to say, which is, and then you have the real problem, which is the fucking crown.
Right.
And that's the real problem. See, when like we fought a quote unquote civil war, what we call down here the recent unpleasantness, over this very issue, right? And secession is now technically not an option. Well, yeah, that's nice legally. All that all means something when people respect pieces of paper, and they respect pieces of paper because they understand that there's still a thing that we want to believe in. But the funny part about it is, I said earlier that the United States really isn't one country; it's 50 little ones. Well, I got news for you. Have you read the Florida Constitution? Have you read the Texas Constitution? Have you read the Tennessee Constitution? They look an awful lot like the federal Constitution. The same things are already in place. So like it's not like it would be a big stretch. Like, we're already there. All that matters is which one you pledge your allegiance ultimately to. So where y'all have the problem is the same thing that the British have, the same thing the Australians have, and everything else is that, look, ultimately, you're crown subjects, and that becomes a much different legal process for you. Look, we're not even immune to it here in Florida. Ron DeSantis tried to take Disney World to the woodshed, and eventually Disney had to finally turn around and go, no, but we're crown land. You can't touch us. You can't tax us. You can't take away our special taxes because we're owned by literally. There's an independent city state in the middle of the state of Florida called Disney World that the crown owns, and we can't govern.
Which crown?
The British crown.
What?
No shit. No, really.
I did not know this. Okay.
Yeah. We didn't either until last year when DeSantis made it an issue. And he finally pushed Disney to the point where they had to admit that this land was ceded to them, was ceded to the British Crown, and is not governed by Florida law.
Okay, Tom, when you mentioned this to me the other day, I thought you were making a Cinderella metaphor.
No, I'm saying for real. Go look this shit up. They finally invoked no, you can't do this to us. We're crown land. And we're like, yeah, okay. Like, this is where I where's Florida man wrestling the friggin' alligator? I'm like, let him know what's going on here. Like, no. It does not work this way.
Okay, I suddenly pictured the Florida version of Paul Revere on the
it's funny. Like, I know I've told this story before. Like, we've talked about guns in this podcast at this point. But when I was visited by the FBI before the Biden administration showed up to talk to me about my relationship with Strategic Culture Foundation.
That sounds like fun.
And then eventually I was issued the OFAC letter saying I'm not allowed to, under penalty of being remanded to Guantanamo. It's fine. But the young FBI, the Mulder who showed up with the Scully Scully didn't say anything. Mulder sat and chatted with me. And he was, he's a young guy. He's like, when he came in from Maryland, right? And went to Georgetown, went to Maryland, and then got transferred down to Miami. So he's telling me this story. Like, he got partnered with an old battle axe guy who's been, 25 years at the Bureau, blah, 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 blah. And to bring him along and doing field work. He's like, so, and the young guy is asked, like, so, what do we do? It's Florida, right? Well, what do we do when because this is Maryland? People don't have as many guns in Maryland as they do in Florida. Like, this is, like, what do we do when there's guns in the house? And we have to go talk to these people and there are guns in the house. And the guy just looked at him and said, son, this is Florida. Every house has a gun in it.
Yeah.
You be respectful and polite. Like,
I think I still have a bumper sticker up here.
At which point, oh, by the way, I had to point out that, we were sitting there having coffee and going over this stuff because I don't know why I invited him into my house because I was an idiot and I've been told this 1,000 times. But I'm like, But yeah, I was polite. But I pointed them to the kitchen table where my wife. This was during COVID. My wife was building bug out bags in case that the house burned down and we needed to leave. And at the same time, literally the bag full of guns, like straight out of a fucking Hong Kong action movie, was like, I'm like, and right behind you, there's the duffel bag full of guns, so that if the house yeah, that was like
So
literally
grab and
there in
go.
my living room. Like, yeah, mine are right there.
What are the odds at that moment when he's visiting, it happens to be
It was
sitting
hilarious.
right
I was
there?
I was like, oh, by the way,
Here's our centerpiece. Perfectly fine. Oh my goodness. Okay.
oh yeah, but that's this is completely kind of normal in Florida. I maybe I shouldn't be saying this in public, but it's like whatever. I was like, I have a double bag full of guns. What a shock that anybody would actually like. Really? Like you would be really like weirded out by the idea that I would have a duffel bag full of guns? Like really?
Not if you're building bug out bags, and it wouldn't be that shocking in rural and Western Canada, but in urban areas, probably similar to what it would be shocking in like New York, for example.
I mean, no, the truth of the matter is that not the summer before, like my neighbors were burning yard trash in the middle of a friggin' drought, set the Planet Pines 20 right next door to me on fire, and we were within 10 minutes of losing the entire house.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. So, I mean, if, we had this moment where had local government actually not gotten a fucking brain, and I live on the other side of the tax hell that is Alachua County. I live on the other side of the Santa Fe River in Southern Columbia County. And, they had just signed, Columbia and Alachua County had just signed a reciprocity thing that they would that the local town in Alachua County, which I live right outside of, that their fire department would cover our land in the southern part of the county, like up to like I don't know, up to the lower 5 miles. Had that not been in place, which had only been literally signed into an agreement like 2 months previously,
oh my god,
my house would have burned down.
God.
We were literally loading the car with stuff, opening up we're getting ready to like open up all the gates and like leave in order for the animals to go find water, because we had goats and ducks and dogs and everything else. Like the best we could do is like watch the house burn down and drive away with the bag full of guns, and everything else. Like this is what we had to. We're packing literally. I'm like, no, we're having bug out bags.
No. And that is straight up smart. It doesn't even matter if you're worried about, a fire or a zombie apocalypse or a tornado or whatever it is. That is smart. And it's a good reminder for me.
Or ravening hordes of Antifa, given what I do for a living. Like, it's not, this is, like I'm getting doxxed. Like this is real.
Yeah.
This is the world we live in, that these people, this is the world that we lived in, and that they have activated these people, like that young girl you talked to, in British Columbia about, oh my God, the world's going to end in 18 months because AOC said so. I'm like, I got news for you. That's not the real problem. The real problem is that you have nefarious people out there using sincere amounts of cheap, shitty, funny money to buy activists who come and destroy their opposition to this. And that's the reality, including, sadly, the FBI agents who came to my house, who, when they served me the OFAC letter, I said that we stayed out in the parking area outside of my fence line, sitting there chatting to them. I said, I don't look forward to the job you guys are going to have, because at some point you're going to get an order that you're not going to want to. Like, I can tell you guys don't want to do this shit. Like, you're going to get an order that you're not sure what you're going to do. Now, I got news for you, dudes. My dad left the state troopers in the 50s the day after they said, and now you need to start writing speeding tickets. He's like, yeah, I didn't get into policing to give out speeding tickets. Fuck you. And then he moved to NYPD.
Oh, interesting.
That's what happened.
Wow, how things change, eh? And so then I would then say, when you bring up the issue of the crown, quite legitimately, so here in Canada, we have, yes, our head of state is King Charles III, but we don't like fly over and talk to him about stuff all the time. We have what's called a Governor General, whose office it is to represent the crown here in Canada. And so what they're supposed to do, this is key word, supposed to do, is basically rubber stamp, give royal assent to legislation. So a law starts in the House of Commons. It's literally called the Commons as opposed to the royalty. Okay. It's green on the floor because it's supposed to represent the grass, okay, of the hills of the commoners meeting in England, okay?
Right.
And then it goes to the Senate, which is often referred to as the royal chamber or red chamber. There's a red carpet in there. And then it is given a royal assent. And what that is supposed to be is a rubber stamp. They're not supposed to actually quibble over it or dicker over it or anything like that. And so it's mostly a symbolic representation of our form of government, of constitutional monarchy. At the federal level, it's a boondoggle, frankly. The governor general is paid way too much. They have an expense account even after they leave office of $100,000 a year. They blow money traveling all over the world. It is stupid. But I'll give you an example. Here at the provincial level, we actually have the same thing, but it's called lieutenant governor or lieutenant governor, you'd call it in the States. They run on a fraction of that budget. Like they usually have day jobs, okay? The job is just, rubber stamping, okay? It is to look it over, make sure there's nothing, by the way, we're conscripting 12-year-old children. Sure.
They're a glorified notary. They're a glorified notary public.
Yeah. I'm sure technically if there were something crazy like I just described, flippantly, that they would probably try to say something or make sure they didn't get the wrong printout or something. All this is to say is they run quite frugally and quite functionally. So I do still think that under our idea of smaller, more accountable, less expensive government at local levels, I think that would be in keeping. We wouldn't raise the crown's ire. Like, I don't think that King Charles III would care in that case. I think he's got other issues going on, like that weird painting that they had made.
Well, the problem is that the crown at this point has now become a captured pawn of these commie European globalist sons of bitches who I think are driving a lot of this. And I think this is something that Canadians really need to wrap their heads around. It's the same thing that Americans have to wrap their heads around, is that we're being invaded from within by our own people. Mm-hmm. And I firmly believe this. And I don't give a shit if people think I'm a crazy ass conspiracy theorist or not. I don't give a shit. Like, okay. I see it. It's because it's right there in front of you because they talk about it every damn day. Yeah. And then they start and it's like in every other week it's another friggin' dumb color revolution stunt in the United States and or Canada or Australia or this place or that place, and you can see it. And it's like, it's not, color revolutions aren't just for third world countries with oil reserves anymore.
Yeah. Okay? What I find the evidence I find with the coordination, right, or things happening at the same time, and I haven't quite been able to put my finger on it. So as a journalist, I'm a bit biased, so I see things still through a journalistic lens. What I found weird, creepy, concerning is that while here in Canada, we've got all sorts of crazy stuff happening with our media. So the federal government is trying to censor our speech online, while at the same time putting a ton of what used to be journalists on the government payroll. Okay. If you're a journalist, you mustn't be paid by the government. Okay. But the reason why I'm dovetailing it with what you're saying is that we saw similar sort of things happening in the UK. So we saw, their version of censors going after groups like GB News, for example, which were similar-ish to Fox, kind of, I would describe it. Maybe a little bit more Breitbarty at the time. They had people like Mark Steyn, right, and Neil Oliver on there. Quite interesting independent thinkers, whether you agree with them or not, independent thinkers. And so they really clamped down on them. And then I noticed in the States, they had similar sort of fact-checky type groups, okay, that were working within mostly the mainstream media. We saw similar sort of language coming out of New Zealand a couple of years ago. You probably remember the Prime Minister saying, Jacinda Ardern, saying something to the effect of, government is your only source of truth now. Like that was Orwellian and terrifying.
We're getting to the point where the Biden administration is now threatening us with the business from the FBI for, saying things that, that are against government policy.
Wow.
Like this, like we're at the point now where it's they're pushing the thing. They have decided that it's now time they've lost control of the narrative. They've lost control of the plot. This is a more powerful medium. What we're doing right now is a more powerful medium than they ever accounted for. They always thought that they were going to be able to control the internet the same way they controlled network television and Hollywood and this, that, and everything else. And it's not working. And now they have to literally just say, okay, fine, we're going to threaten to put you in jail for mean tweets. And we're hoping that if we put one person in jail, that it'll cow 10,000. Well, I've been arguing for a long, long time that policing is a myth, and it's a myth based on that basic model. And once you have more dissidents than you have cops that are not scared of the cops, you have a problem on your hands. And
how are they doing it at the same time? I needed to pick your brain on this because this is the part that I haven't figured out. Like, is this going through? So, say if you go to a journalism degree program, like a 4-year degree program or a master's or whatever, is it going through the academia? Like, is Ryerson, or now I can't remember what it's called now. I think it's called Toronto City University or something. Is the
right.
journalism school of Toronto, for example, talking to the journalism school of Columbia, talking to all of the fancy kind of journalism school circles
What
of
I would
academics?
what I
Like,
would
is that
say
where it's going
is
through?
what I would say is that they handpicked that they filtered out the people at the best schools were always the best schools because they were the ones where they had the guardrails placed on who gets to be placed in the right positions. And this is a long march through the institutions. This has been going on for 80. This has been going on for 3 or 4 generations. And now is when they take the mask off and they say, okay, we don't have journalists anymore. We haven't had journalists in this country, and in the United States, we haven't had journalists in a long, long time. When we have court stenographers is the way I like to put it. That's what we have. And it's been that way for a long, long time. And, and it's a process. Like it's a process of, starving of the newspapers effectively not being able to keep up with the internet and just all that, with the cost of journalism, of real journalism being higher than the potential return, at the end of the day, this was always where we were going to wind up. With only 1 or 2. I remember Dexter White saying to me years ago, he's like, UPI and Reuters just like merge, or UPI and AP just merge. We don't even have competing wire services anymore. This is dangerous.
Yep.
And that moment was dangerous. This is dangerous. That's dangerous. How that. So now you have fewer and fewer people in control of everything. You have running the show. And so you wind up with oligarchies in every one of these important institutions. And then, the intelligence services are all up the grills of every one of these major universities. And then you just make sure that you place the right people in charge of them. Only those people get, promoted and set the agenda. And it's just been, that's the process. And I that's not a conspiracy theory, folks. That's chapter 10 of The Road to Serfdom.
Yeah.
It's the mechanism by which this is, because the incentives were there for the people without scruples and without morals. The incentives, the financial incentives were there. The power incentives were there. And the money was, and this is what's so pernicious about taxation, because now they have a complete money laundering system in order to direct the flow of funds where they want it to go. And they take it out of the hands of the private sector who's competing with them. So the private sector for information was always at a disadvantage. The private sector it's like we had subsidized. I wrote about this the other day. We had subsidized speech for all of these years on college campuses, thanks to the Civil Rights Act, be it Title VI, Title VII, Title VIII, Title IX, doesn't matter. Government money flows into this stuff. You have all this money flowing in. That means that all of these little activist groups and everything else they have money to make placards and give out free lunch on the quad and blah, 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 blah. Whereas we're fighting, we're getting no subsidies from anybody else to say, hey, this is a bad idea. Got news for you. People, eventually people aren't listening. And they understood that using the college campuses that way, because, if you're 20 years old and you're not a liberal, you don't have a heart. And when you're 50 years old, you don't have a brain. Like, yes, you're a conservative, you don't have a brain. Like these things are real. Like they understand this stuff. They understand the psychology of it. Well, hell, they fucking wrote the books on the psychology on this shit.
Literally. And now they're diverting in Canada. I don't know if this is happening in the same scale in the United States, but in Canada, they're now funding newsrooms directly with taxpayers' money. So yes, right. We already have, most Americans will know, we already have what's called the CBC up here, the Canadian Broadcasting It is a monster. Okay.
Mhm.
It takes $1.4 billion from us every single year. To put that into perspective, you could otherwise pay 7,000 cops and 7,000 paramedics a full salary every year for what we pay for the CBC. Separate from that, the
Yes.
Trudeau government is putting what used to be private media corporation journalists on government payroll.
Yes.
In many cases, Tom, it's upwards of $30,000 per year,
Sure.
equivalent to their salary.
Yep.
And so now you've got these people who used to be arguably independent journalists who are now supposed to be speaking truth to power. Okay. They're now supposed to be asking the tough W5 questions in the halls of power. Just imagine this to the guy who they're counting on for their paycheck. Like, that is such an obvious conflict of interest. It's embarrassing to say out loud. I mean, it's just, should make anybody ashamed and blush for saying something so obvious, right? But it's true. And so we've got I picture it like a vice, okay? I call it the censorship industrial complex. I think Glenn Greenwald called it that before too. So I'm not trying to rip him off.
Sure.
But on one side of this vice, okay, we have got the Trudeau government putting tons of journalists on the government payroll. They are now reliant, okay, on that blood coming from the taxpayer. And nobody asked us, okay? This is not something that we voted on. So that's one side of the vice. More journalists becoming stenographers. More of them becoming pushers of government propaganda because they're on the payroll. Okay?
Right.
Other side of the vice, they've got these laws that they're trying to shove through. One little glimmer of hope, C11, which was a really big law that was dealing with online censorship of things like podcasts, like something like this show, or independent media, okay, something like True North or Rebel or Western Standard in Canada. It would be Breitbart, I would describe it in the States, I'm guessing, or that Free Press one that Barry Weiss runs. So they were trying
Epic
to regulate.
Times, a few others. Epic Times.
There you go. Perfect. And there's some on the left as well, but I'm just not familiar with. So they were trying to regulate them through this ridiculous narrow band of government bureaucrats who decide what you can say online, right? So they've now backed off on that a little bit. They've kicked that ahead until after the next election. So they blinked there. That's good.
Yeah.
But they've got this new one called Bill C-63. And it sounds so crazy that I feel a little weird describing it. And so they might tamp it down as it goes through the House. I'm not sure. But this is according to constitutional law experts raising their concerns, and I'm trying to paraphrase them. Essentially, what they're trying to do is that we have hate speech laws in Canada, so that you cannot, incite hatred against an identifiable group. So say, God forbid you were, anti-Semitic and you wanted to start questioning things that happened in the Second World War and you were inciting hatred against an identifiable group and calling for them to die, right? That could be considered hate speech. And then you would go through something like the Human Rights Tribunal, or it could even be criminal court. So you actually go to court as if you had assaulted someone. That's already on the books, okay? Right. What they're proposing to change is that if an individual thinks that another person might, in the future, say something hateful online, they can then report that person to the Human Rights Tribunal in Canada, anonymously. The Human Rights Tribunal can then drag that person, where the process is the punishment, through this rigmarole at their expense, okay? Mm-hmm. All based on something they might say in the future. That's why some people are referring to this as like Minority Report, like future thought crime. It goes back the other way, though. You don't just need to hang out with Tom Cruise. Go back in time with Jean-Claude Van Damme, okay? Because it's back in the past, too. So anything that they decide you have access to, imagine a columnist or a talk show host going back through 2 decades of stuff that's posted online. And if you don't scrub it within the next 36 hours, you will be then dragged in front of this tribunal. So they're really concerned, both left and right civil rights activists here in Canada are concerned that this will cause a chilling effect on Canadian expression. So that people, you think people will be so scared to say anything because they'll become financially ruined and it'll clog up the system. I mean, I think there's like 8 bureaucrats who deal with this typically. So guess what? They're going to have to expand that bureaucracy, Tom. They're going to have a whole bunch of people now signing on to this. And so I'm doing a bit more reading on it, a bit more of a deep dive, because again, it sounds so out there that I keep looking for the catch of like, just kidding, put at the end of it. But that's what we're dealing with here in Canada.
Minority Report, but with more Germans is the way I've described it many, many, many times. And I'm not even being like, I've been saying this for 4 years. People are getting tired of me saying it, but like, just take Minority Report, take the precogs out and
Yeah.
put in AI, and an algorithmic scrubbing of
Yeah.
listing, of going back
Any
over the
word, find a key phrase.
right. That's all you got to
Mhm.
do, and then boom, and then all you got to do is like pay somebody to file a grievance. Well, that was tough. Like, you can't find, I mean, it's not just a chilling effect. It's beyond that. This is now flat out, you don't get to speak because
Correct.
this is beyond Orwell. Orwell would look at these people and go, wow, huh, I'm a
You really jumped the
tourist.
fence on that one.
I
Yeah.
know, I'm a tourist. What I
Yeah.
came up with, like, this is now, this is far worse than that. This is Brazil.
Mm.
Okay. More so than it is 1984. 1984, the implication was it was just kind of, this is the way it evolved into.
Yeah.
Brazil, like, visually, the visual language of Brazil, of the insane mix of new and old technology,
Mhm.
and all of it visually told you everything you needed to know, which was that it is all about the clerical error. Think about the movie Brazil, the whole
Mhm.
Tuttle Buttle thing, and a
Mhm.
fly landing in a freaking typewriter, because we still use typewriters because, for whatever, in a digital age, they still use typewriters. They have
Yes,
computers,
yes,
they
yes.
still use stuff, right? They're still, and guess what? There are parts of the government that still use faxes. This
Yes,
is
I
not
know
like
them.
it's not like Gilliam and Tom Stoppard and Charles McCallum were wrong about any of this. The mixture of old and new technology is weird. Ever use a government website? Like, they're all straight out of the mid 1990s.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I know I know people who used to write government websites, for Christ's sake, for this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, they were bad coders then,
Yeah.
and their code's still running. Like, it's
Yeah.
terrible, right?
I know. And
So
this is where we're jumping in on this, the Taxpayers Federation, because in the same
you
way
have
that
to.
we opposed, we have to. So I'll be perfect example. So in the same way that we opposed the invocation of the Emergencies Act, because surprise, if you suspend all of your civil rights, you can't hold the government to account, right? If you can't speak and if you can't organize and you can't protest or whatever it is, we don't care what the topic is, you can't hold government to account. That's very basic, right? And so we're like, hey, yeah, no, you shouldn't be doing this. And so we spoke out on that. Same sort of thing here. And it brings me back all the way back around to where the Trudeau government got so mad at us when we found out that they were planning a pickup truck tax, at least in their reports they were, that they called us something like disinformation or misinformation. This
Yes.
is coming from the mouth of a minister. Okay. This is
Yes.
not just some, whack job on Twitter. This is the
Right.
government stating this
Yep.
towards an organization that's been around since like the fax machine since
Right.
1990. That was a big deal.
Well,
So
yeah.
it's
Well, of course it's a big deal, because it's literally saying they're criminalizing mal, and disinformation.
that's
They're
right.
the purveyors of mal, and disinformation. When you point it out, well, of course you're going to wind up in the web. Like, they're creating the process crime by which like, it's not Orwellian. It's Kafkaesque.
Yeah.
It's
I wanted
okay.
to give a last example just to try to be as fair as I can. And I think lived examples really matter because
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
relate to them and you can remember them better. So with something like C11, where it was online expression, or C63, which is more online expression, and funding the media, all of that jazz happening on both sides of this vice in Canada and unfortunately other parts of the West. So I was working on Parliament Hill just after 9/11 in the early 2000s. And it was in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. Okay. A big portion of Canada wanted to join our natural allies in the United Kingdom. Keep in mind, it wasn't just the States. The UK, our motherland, was going along with this.
Right.
And so a big portion of Canadians were fine with going along with it and helping out with the invasion of Iraq. A big chunk, though, were against it. And so I remember distinctly, okay, this is around early 2000s. There were message boards back then on the internet, right? There was no Twitter. And so it was largely open message boards. You didn't have to, have a secret code. Online chat rooms, big message boards. That's really where people were spreading and sharing information. of,
Yep.
hey, this is what's happening. Did you see this on this news outlet? What about this element? We got people in from other countries around the world, all giving their input. And then they had a massive rally, okay, across Canada in most major cities, especially in Ottawa. And they organized this online. They spread their information online. Everybody show up to Parliament Hill at this time. And I remember it was bitterly cold. It was January or February out on the hill that day. And it was huge. Like there were tens of thousands of people down the street. Okay,
Nice.
all saying, you know what? No thanks. We don't want this. Couple days later, our prime minister stood up in the House of Commons and said, we're going to sit this one out.
There you go.
So, speaking as Ronald Reagan would say to my friends on the left, to my liberal friends, Jeff, if you don't like, Donald Trump, and if you don't like Pierre Poilievre or whatever, if you don't like conservatives or right wingers, and you want to control their speech because your guy's in right now, say Trudeau is your bestie, and you want him deciding what people can see, hear, and share on the internet, are you going to be that comfortable if it's the other guy in charge?
Yep.
The answer is no, my friend. This is
Not
why
exactly.
we have fundamental freedoms that are supposed to be protected.
Right. This
And
is
this is
why
what we're fighting.
this is why the Second Amendment is there to ensure that the First Amendment sticks.
Must be
Spoken
nice.
spoken like someone, this is what the founding fathers were thinking of when they put it together. This is what we believe very seriously in these things, and it's why they have to get rid of free speech through process crime and guns through process crime. They have this because they can't do that. I mean, as much as they want to believe that the Constitution is a dead letter, it's not, because they have to continue, because you still have the vestiges of people reading the Constitution going, no, you can't justify that under the Interstate Commerce Clause or the General Welfare Clause or the Supremacy Clause or all the other things that they've driven a fucking Mack truck with subsidized diesel fuel through over the last 90 years. No, that's enough. We're done. That it stops here. And this is why this is why Davos / the British, that oligarchy, I can call it whatever the hell you want, were so crazy about Donald Trump getting the ability to push 3 Supreme Court judges onto the thing. It's not about reversing abortion or this. It's about them being able to legislate from the bench and destroy. They had a plan to destroy what was left of the Constitution and get it done, and leave off any potential challenges on a constitutional basis for another generation while they pushed everything through. That was the plan. That's what they're angry with Trump about. And not to say that Amy Coney Barrett or Brett Kavanaugh or even Gorsuch are all been all that great, but they've been better than they would have been otherwise. And and the other work, the real work that Trump doesn't get a lot of credit for. And I'm hard on Trump all the time, but what he never really got credit for. And in some ways you can almost, I know I'm going to be really dirty saying this, but you can even say that Mitch McConnell was instrumental in getting a lot of circuit court judges through that would never have gone through otherwise. And I got Robert Barnes standing on my shoulder going, yeah, but they were all Federalist Society jackasses and not real constitutional lawyers and, constitutional constructionists and yada, yada, yada. Yeah, but they're a fuckload better than Sotomayor.
Don't let perfect get in the way of done.
And we're seeing the payoff from that in a lot of these ridiculous lawfare things that are going through. We're seeing a lot of payoff with Stephen Miller's pack about challenging the Civil Rights Act on a variety of levels. I can't remember the name of the thing. It's happening. It's there. It's in the background. It's building. And all you need is the right framework for on Capitol Hill post election, and you can actually get that done. I think this is probably, I hate to say it, a good place to stop, because we're now been going for 2 hours. And yeah, no, seriously, which has been fun as hell. And I don't even give a shit if anybody listens to this episode.
Can I ask you a really easy, short question? And yeah, I'm sure you can answer in like 5 seconds. As a Canadian watching you guys, what do you think is going to happen in November, or is that a whole nother podcast?
Oh God, that is literally a whole nother podcast.
Okay.
I can say that they're prepping for Trump to win, and they're also trying to ensure that when he gets in the power, if they don't steal it, that he doesn't make any difference anyway. This is a process that they will not allow anybody to stop. It's too important, because if they lose this, if they don't destroy the United States in the next 18 months, like legally, and they don't destroy the bond market legally in the next 18 months to 2 years, that in my read, the whole thing fails, and the whole thing starts to collapse. And then it's really good for what's happening in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and then all the other Canadian provinces that want to take up that mantle as well. And the same thing for the rest of the center of the United States. The political center of the United States is shifting rapidly. They know they don't have a lot of time left, so they've got to get it done now, and they got to get it done before everybody strokes out on national television, because that's the real worry at this point. Like, the best thing that can happen to the United States, I said this the other day, and I will say it again, and I know that saying this will get me into trouble with a lot of people, but the best thing that can happen to the United States is for Joe Biden to have a stroke on national TV during the debates. It would be horrible, it would be horrific, but it would be the biggest wake-up call and the biggest momentum collapse of the whole fucking thing that we could ever. Yeah, no, really, the system is this freaking crazy. The man is not president. Can we please stop with the bullshit? Can we just please stop?
Sounds like there's a different sort of reset that is required. And if we can, I keep on going back to the local government level.
Yes.
And if we can get back to people being active and seeing their neighbors and having local government meetings instead of this big, massive mess that, again, you're paying half your salary to people who don't want you to own a gas stove or a pickup truck, right? I think if we can get back there, I think that we'll be doing really good.
I agree, and I think that the last point on this is that everybody, left, right, center, black, blue, brown, right, humility. You don't have the answer to the world's problems. You don't. I don't have the answers to my own problems.
I know. That's what I keep wondering. How can it figure all this out?
Dinner tonight, and I'm going to sit here and try and fix the fucking world. How about a healthy dose of humility from everybody, and everybody like put their Dunning-Kruger effect into the corner and pet it and let it, and then put it to bed, and then go live your life and stop worrying about whatever. Stop worrying that, oh my God, someone out there might be actually having a little bit of goddamn fun.
You're awesome, Tom.
Well, on that note, I think this is a perfect place to end. I just got an awesome. I'm good. Like ego satisfied.
We'll talk Zack Snyder next time.
Yeah, no, absolutely, dude. I love that. Would be great. Absolutely. This has been an absolute blast. I've really enjoyed every minute of it, and I could probably do this for another hour. But I'm telling you, my wife is going to get angry with me if I don't like leave the man cave and actually go interact with her sometime today. So I'm going to cut it off here. Kris Sims, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Awesome job. Awesome work. Really love it. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Be well. Well, that'll about wrap it up for episode 175 of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. I want to thank Kris Sims for what I knew would be a hoot of a conversation. When I met Kris in Lloydminster 2 weeks ago, I'm like, you have to be on the podcast. You're just too much of a live wire not to. So I really want to thank her because I had a great fun. So as always, you can follow my work over at my blog at tomluongo.me or goldgoatsandguns.com. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728, and you can follow up and support the podcast directly through Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns, where we do a monthly investment newsletter making sense of all this crazy stuff and a portfolio strategy, as well as bi-weekly market reports where you can just get more of me and more technical analysis of strategic markets and all the rest of it. So there it is. If that's what you like, then cool. We'll see you there. If not, that's fine too. You guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.